Depth chart for Wales in the year gone. That was 2021. Almost at the end of the depth chart videos, folks. If you haven't been following them, we've done South Africa and New Zealand and England and France. And basically just been working our way down the Rugby World Rankings. We are now at Wales. Basically, we're going to look through the season that was 2021 to see which players kind of played, how much time did they get, where are Wales looking pretty consistent with their selections, where are they chopping and changing. We'll basically just get through it from there. It's an interesting one with Wales because 2021 was a bit of a mixed year. Obviously, they won the Six Nations, didn't quite get the slam when they lost that last game to France. They'd beaten Italy, England, Scotland and Ireland prior to that. I know there were a fair few doubters about Wales, saying they only won because of red cards and whatnot. I'm not having that, man. The Wales squad got the wins. I don't really care about the red cards, to be honest. I've seen plenty of teams lose. As I record this, Munster not long ago came back from a man down for the majority of the game and beat Ulster. It happens enough that I would say you still have to go and get the job done, even if you have got the extra man. So, yeah, good start to the year, win the Six Nations. During the Lions period, it's a mixed one. They beat Canada pretty easily, which is something they should be doing. Then draw and lose to Argentina, who were more or less at full strength, to be fair. But it was played in Wales, and Argentina hadn't had a heck of a lot of game time. And then end of the year is not ideal. They lose to New Zealand and South Africa. One of the games is kind of without some of their frontline players, and then win against Fiji and Australia. So it's mixed. Certainly a mixed bag. And so are the positions as we look through them. There are very few positions in this Welsh lineup where one guy gets 80% of the minutes all year. It just hasn't happened. Partly that's because of a Lions tour, but let's go through them. So we'll start in the front row, and you can see the most minutes any one player has got of those three positions is at tight head, and that's Thomas Francis, who's had about half of the game time last year in 2021. Dylan Lewis and Leon Brown are there in blue because Thomas Francis is in green, Dylan Lewis blue, and Leon Brown's there in yellow. You've also had Will Griffith-John there a little bit in purple. So it's kind of a healthy looking depth chart, and that first, second and third have all had decent amounts of game time. So they're certainly building a bit of depth, with Thomas Francis being the clear first choice guy based on how much time he's got. He's not even 30 yet, so that kind of bodes well for Wales going in to 2022. Loose head's pretty similar. Wyn Jones has had the majority of the time. Remember, he was away with the Lions, so he would have missed out on some game time in the middle of the year. It's a little less kind of clear cut as to the backup guys, just because they've got an extra player in there. Instead of the time split between three guys, it's split between four. Reece Carey's there in blue. Gareth Thomas is there in yellow. Nicky Smith's there in purple. And then Rodri Jones there in red. It feels like Reece Carey's the second choice guy, as long as he stays kind of fit in terms of not just injured, but also, match fit. Fitness has kind of been a bit of a question mark about him in recent times. But, I reckon Wyn Jones and Thomas Francis, that's a pretty tidy looking kind of first couple of guys for mine. I know Wyn Jones is one guy who cops a bit of stick from maybe areas outside Wales. Maybe he concedes too many penalties. So does Zandy Ferguson for Scotland. Like some of the best props. It's just a position where sometimes you're a bit prone to penalties getting thrown your way. But I reckon Wyn Jones was pretty bloody tidy in 2021. Hooker is one which is kind of similar to tight head, but then towards the end of the year, they were scrambling to get guys to cover because of injury. So you got Ken Owens there in green. Remember, he went on the Lions tour. Then Ryan Elias is there in blue. Elliot D is there in yellow. And then you got Sam Parry, Kirby Myhill, and Bradley Roberts all kind of getting real token minutes towards the end of the season. Myhill and Roberts had to be kind of getting their first caps towards the end of the year, as Wales were just having an absolute injury crisis. But at 35, the Sheriff still seems to be the first choice guy. There's question marks a bit about Elias and D as to whether they would kind of step up to be that front runner. You would expect at age, what are they? But I think they're both 27. they should be kind of coming into that period of their career where they'll be, pushing past the veteran and relegating him to the bench, but it hasn't quite happened just yet. So, I mean, I look at that and go, yep, there's certainly a bit of depth being built in Welsh rugby there. The one that looks the healthiest to me is tight head, just based on what we see in terms of how much depth has been built and the ages and how the distribution of time seems pretty kind of even. Locks are a bit of an interesting one. I've gone 4 and 5, so loose head lock 4, tight head lock 5. Annoyingly, towards the end of the year, they did swap the numbers around. Like usually it was the 5 packing down behind the tight head, but towards the end of the year they shifted it around. So I've kind of gone more with the position rather than necessarily the jersey number. It's Adam Baird in green for 4, and it's Will Rowlands in green for 5. Now, you would expect Alan Wynne-Jones to be there. Remember, for him, he went away on the Lions tour and then also got injured towards the end of the year, so didn't get as much game time for Wales as we would ordinarily expect. So 4 is Adam Baird, just over half the time. He has had almost more minutes for Wales this year than anybody else, and I don't think that's a bad thing, because he's another guy that seems to be a bit underrated by some. When people put him on, when he was on the Lions tour, people were like, what on earth is that guy doing there? Well, why is he not there? The guy's massive. He's a huge unit. He's got a pretty specific role. Wins line-out ball and disrupts mauls like nobody's business. If you're going to South Africa, Adam Baird seemed like a pretty useful choice for mine, but yeah, he's there as your main guy at 4. Ben Carter's kind of your up-and-coming guy who's there, only 20 years old. He's there in blue, and then you've had Corey Hill there in yellow, and you've had other guys, Matthew Screech, Seb Davis, and then Will Rowlands, like token time there in brown, but all those guys have had time. But essentially it's Adam Baird and Ben Carter with a little bit of Corey Hill as your main guys. 5, as I mentioned, Will Rowlands is there with just under half the time in green. Alan Wynne-Jones is there in blue, 36 years old, I think he is. There's people still questioning him. I'm a stats guy, and I don't see his stats visibly dropping below anybody else. His work rate is still huge, so I'm still a big kind of backer of Alan Wynne. And as a captain, they don't get many better. Just the way he's able to manage and work with referees is something that if you don't have it, you really notice it. So looking to see him play maybe a bit more time in 2022, but maybe they manage his minutes and maybe kind of don't just give him all the time. It's hard when he's captain that you kind of feel you need to play him either 80 minutes or kind of 70 minutes plus, but it's certainly been a good one for Will Rowlands to get some regular starting game time. You've also got Seb Davis there, Jake Ball, but he's off abroad now, so he's not really going to be considered in purple. Yeah, all the other guys, token minutes, Turnbull, Beard, and Chiunza as kind of the youngster, the prospect. But it's really an interesting one. Like I want to see Ben Carter get more game time for sure, but it's hard to see Pivac going past Alan Wynne and Adam Baird if they're both fit. But we'll have to kind of wait and see. After the end of the year, maybe Pivac's under a bit of pressure to win more now, because based on what we're seeing here, they have already done a bit of the blooding of depth. But in a World Cup, obviously, you need to be blooding the guys. I mean, just look, every time Wales get to a World Cup, they seem to have an injury crisis. So these minutes you put in now could be beneficial towards the end of the World Cup cycle. Loosies is always an area where Wales seems to have loads of depth, and they will certainly test it again with guys out injured. I mean, just look at number 6. How many bloody players played there? Navidi, with less than a third of the overall minutes, is still there as your leading guy at 6 for minutes. Ellis Jenkins, who was a bit of a revelation on his return, it's almost like signing a new player. He's there in blue. Moriarty's there in yellow. Josh Turnbull's there in purple. Seb Davis is there in red. Aaron Wainwright's there in the kind of brownie colour. You've got both of them. You've got Lydiot and Chiunza there as well. 6 seems to be the jersey that gets chopped and changed in most teams from looking at the depth chart. But you'd have to say you've got options, whatever you want to go with here in Wales. I mean, Navidi is pretty much a good all-round player. He can do a bit of everything, and he's also flexible enough to play multiple positions. As I mentioned, Jenkins has been phenomenal on his return. His turnovers and whatnot have been just exquisite. Moriarty, proper workhorse player, physical presence. Turnbull's been really good on his return as well. He's been great for Cardiff, so kind of earned a recall at, like, what is he, 33? So, yeah. Seb Davis, if you want that kind of lock, loose forward player, is also a useful option. So you got loads of options at 6 for Wales. Likewise at 7, when you got Tipperick there as your guy in green, who still had not quite half the minutes, but he's your leading guy. And then you've had Tane Basham there in blue. And speaking of guys who've been an absolute revelation, the guy's only like 22. He has been a massive find. Like, when you take out Justin Tipperick from a Welsh side, the level of the team drops, right? Because that guy is just world class. But Tane Basham has just absolutely stepped up. So I think it's been pleasing to see him get some proper game time and not look out of place at all. James Botham's there in yellow, and then Thomas Young is also there in purple. So I think you're sitting quite pretty for 7s in Wales. I mean, Tipperick's obviously the veteran, he's in his 30s, and then you got Botham and Basham both in their early 20s, and then Thomas Young, I think you're almost 30, coming back to Welsh rugby as well. So yeah, you're looking pretty good there. Number 8, likewise, Faletau's there in green, and Aaron Wainwright's there in blue. They've played very kind of similar amounts of game time this year. Moriarty's there in yellow. Basham and Jenkins have also kind of filled in at 8 towards the tail end of games when needed as well. But I mean, Faletau, Wainwright, and Moriarty, 1, 2, and 3, or if it's Wainwright 1, Faletau's on the bench, it doesn't really matter. I think that's looking pretty healthy. First choice, second choice, third choice, as it like experienced guy, developing guy who's been around for a while now, to be fair, and Wainwright, and then Moriarty is the kind of versatile guy. He can be on the bench to cover 6 and 8, whatever you need. I think the back row looks pretty good. As I said, the depth was tested. Remember, against the All Blacks, they had players out injured, they had players unavailable playing in England, but yeah, I think you'd be pretty chuffed if you're a Welsh fan at the depth you've got there. Now, when you look at the forwards overall, I guess the only thing is there's not anybody who's played more minutes than, as I said, Adam Baird, who's played just over half. Loosehead, Hooker, 5, number tight head lock, 6, 7, and 8. None of those starting guys have played even 50% of the minutes this year. So maybe that's one thing that's a touch of a concern, but sometimes it's just injuries. Sometimes it's the guys being out on the Lions tour. So overall, it's a good depth building year, and you still managed to pick up a Six Nations title amongst it. Into the backs, it's a weird one again that I'm not really sure who is your first choice 9. Based on this, it's Thomas Williams, who's had just under half of the game time, and then Gareth Davis in blue, Kieran Hardy there in yellow, and then Lloyd Williams is there in purple with some kind of token time. You guys have got loads of 9s. I mean, Reece Webb's not even on the list, but I don't know, like a lot of countries you can kind of look at, like DuPont's obviously a bit of an exception, but the All Blacks pretty much, if Aaron Smith's fit, he's going to play. For the Aussies, pretty much Nick White, if he's fit, he's going to play. For England, Ben Youngs is going to play. You can pick most teams 9. Not all, but Wales, there's not a consistent guy, but I guess if you're looking in depth chart terms rather than consistency terms, that's good. One guy's had almost half. One guy's had a quarter, the other guy's had a quarter, so they've all had a decent crack this year. There's nobody like getting 80% of the game time and everyone else is kind of living off scraps, not getting that valuable international duty. So you can kind of look at it both ways. 10 is kind of similar. Dan Bigger with half the time. He's the veteran, the Lions tour guy. He's like, in his early 30s. So he's probably going to be the guy going through to the World Cup. And then you got Sheedy, who's there with just over a quarter of the time. And you got loads of other guys as well. You've had Jared Evans there in yellow. You've had Gareth Anscombe there in purple. You've got Reece Priestland, who's come back, in his mid-30s there in red. Ben Thomas had a very kind of brief cameo, I think it was against Canada. And then you haven't even played Reece Patchell. So it's another one where you're kind of stacked, loaded with 10s. You probably don't need that many 10s. But it's Bigger and then Sheedy at the moment. Who the second choice guy at 10 kind of remains to be seen once Anscombe gets back fit, if Patchell gets back playing. Sheedy's goal kicking can sometimes be a touch unreliable. But yeah, it's certainly one to watch. Gareth Anscombe's been kicking the house down for Ospreys, so at the moment it's bigger. And in terms of depth chart, it looks maybe the third choice guy's not that healthy, but I don't know. It's been a mixture. It's like guys like Anscombe and Priestland. They've got loads of experience, even if they didn't get a heck of a lot of game time in 2021. The midfield is one where it's also a slightly strange one. You've got a bunch of guys in the Welsh midfield who are quite happy to play 12 or 13. There's not that many kind of specialist guys. Like if you're looking at 13, George North's there in green, so he is kind of a specialist 13. When he's not on the outside backs, he's playing at 13 and he looked bloody good. Then blue, you got Jonathan Davis. And then Willis Halaholo is there in yellow. But Davis and Halaholo are both there at 12 as well. And then you got purple for 13 is Nick Tompkins, and he also appears at 12 as well. So there doesn't seem to be that much in the way of specialisation. The midfield's a pretty hard place to kind of chop and change. Most guys have a preference. Some guys quite happy to to play one or the other without much of a difference. But yeah, they've mixed up the minutes, but it's either 12's playing 13 or 13's playing 12. Owen Watkins there in red, and then Ben Thomas again there with some kind of token game time towards the end is there in brown. For 12, it's Jonathan Davis, who we saw at 13 in blue. He's at green for 12, so he's had, if you add those 12 and 13 minutes together, he's probably played more minutes than anybody else for Wales this year. Halaholo's there in blue for 12. Nick Tompkins is there in yellow, and then Johnny Williams is there in purple. So you've got depth, I think, amongst several guys for Wales in the mid. But, I mean, personally, I'd like to see, I guess if George North's fit, because remember, he misses half the year out injured. If George North is fit, you see more consistency at 13. Probably that means more consistency at 12. Tompkins is playing in the Premiership, so sometimes his availability was questionable. Sometimes it was just injuries and whatnot. So, yeah, it's just mixed. It's mixed. And then the outside backs, I think you'd have to be pretty chuffed if you're a Welsh fan with the outside backs, because your leading guys, left wing Josh Adams, very happy with him there. He's had about half the time. Lewis Rees-Zammett's green on the right wing, over half the time. And then Liam Williams is green at fullback, just under half the time. That's a pretty bloody good back three, right? That's a world-class back three for mine. Real dangerous. Adams is somehow seemingly underrated still by some. Really good in the air, makes good decisions quick. He's got gas. Lewis Rees-Zammett is just phenomenally quick and pretty mature for like a 20-year-old. And then Liam Williams with that bomb defusal job he does at the back as well. That's pretty tidy. Now, left wing's been pretty mixed, and there are a bunch of other guys that have got a crack. Tom Rogers there in blue, Owen Lane there in yellow, Lewis Rees-Zammett switched and played left wing, I think for one game there in purple. Nick Tompkins has had to shift out to the wing from time to time. Hallam Amos, Liam Williams as well, and Lee Halfpenny. They've all kind of been shoved out to the wing at some point. It's usually not where they start, but when things get rejigged, guys end up out on the wing. Right wing, you've got more. It's like Owen Lane there in blue. Jonah Holmes, Cuthbert's there as well. Speaking of kind of veterans, Nick Tompkins again, and then Johnny McNichol. So same as kind of the midfield, that you've got guys like Owen Lane, Lewis Rees-Zammett, Nick Tompkins, who've been shoved out to both positions. But they tend to have a preference. Owen Lane, I guess, and you combine both of his numbers together, he's had around about a quarter of all of the minutes that they've been played, for Wales this year. And I'm kind of pleased for him, because he's a proper big unit who can get over the advantage line. One of those big fellas who's also got wheels, which is not all that common. So, I'd like to see him get more time. But how do you crack into that back three with Adams and Rees-Zammett? It's tough, but I'm sure Pivac will do a wee bit of rotation. Fullback, you're pretty blessed. I mean, Liam Williams, green, McNichol, blue, Amos, yellow, although he's retiring, Halfpenny, purple, Holmes, red, and then Bigger, very briefly for a cameo towards the end of a game there in brown. I guess the only thing is, like Liam Williams is 30, McNichol's 31, and Halfpenny's 32. There's a bit of age there. You could use kind of an up-and-coming youngster to fill in at fullback, but in terms of a World Cup cycle, these guys are still going to be kind of fighting fit going into 2023 because they'll still be in their early 30s. So, yeah, that's the Welsh squad for the year. Like I said, in any one position, Rhys Zammit has had the most minutes with just over half. And then Adam Baird is the top for forwards. Jonathan Davis, like I mentioned, like in any one position, he's not ranking that high. But if you put his 12 and 13 time together, he's played quite a lot of game time for Wales this year. It's very, very, very mixed compared to the likes of, if you've gone back and seen the South Africa video I did for the depth chart or the Scottish video, you can clearly see first choice, second choice, and that's pretty much it. Like, you know, the leading guys play well more than half the minutes throughout the year. Wales, to be fair, haven't been in a position for that this year with the amount of injuries they've had. I mean, off the top of my head, I wrote down North, Tipuric, Liam Williams, Alan Wynne-Jones, Navidi, Lydiot. They've all been injured, and that's just the top of my head. There's more, but a lot of these guys were having kind of long-term injuries this year. So Pivac has had to make changes, and he's had to blood some young guys. Not to mention, I've just remembered the hookers. Like, there was numerous guys down at one point. That's why they were having to kind of give guys their first caps. Who was the most picked 15 this year? It was Wynne-Jones, Ken Owens, and Thomas Francis. That's the most picked front row. Adam Baird, Will Rowlands. Like I mentioned, it would normally be Alan Wynne, but with Lions saw an injury. It's not Navidi, Tipuric, and Faletau. That's an experienced, but also, I would say, pretty world-class back row. Thomas Williams and Dan Bigger, 9-10. Jonathan Davis, George North, 12-13. Adams, Rhys Zammit, and Liam Williams, 11, 14, and 15. So that 15 there in those positions played 45% of all the minutes this year, which is the lowest of any team I've looked at, which means the starting guys, these first-choice guys, haven't played as much time for Wales as the first choice guys like for South Africa have played for South Africa. The first choice guys for Scotland have played for Scotland, which just means Wales have used more players and they have rotated more. But as I mentioned, it's sometimes been just needs must. Guys out with the Premiership, guys out injured, and guys on the Lions tour. So that's just kind of the way it's gone. Guys who are leaving, as I mentioned, Amos is retiring. Jake Ball's left Welsh Rugby, so you won't see him anymore. There's been a few guys who we've seen in Welsh colours before that didn't feature this year. The likes of James Davis, Rob Evans, Reece Patchell, Shane Lewis-Hughes, Luke Morgan, Reece Webb, all for kind of different reasons. Some guys have been injured, some guys have just been kind of not favoured. But yeah, there's certainly guys that we've seen in the past that didn't play. Some of the guys I'm most excited about, two of the forwards actually, it's Basham and Ben Carter. These guys, I think, you know, have looked the business thus far from what we've seen to them, especially Tame Basham. He just looks like a phenomenal prospect. I mean, there's some other guys who we've seen playing in Welsh Rugby this year who didn't get called up. What's his name? Anaran Owen looks like he could be a decent prospect. I know from a Kiwi connection, Michael Collins has kind of got Welsh aspirations. I'm not sure whether he gets in because the midfield, as I mentioned, is really looking pretty full with guys who have been getting some regular game time. But I guess he is also a kind of another potential option. But yeah, as I said, more rotation than I've seen from any other squad this year. Not necessarily by design. It's been a bit of needs must. But hopefully for Wales, that's a decent investment into the future for the squad because these guys have played international rugby, which is just invaluable. And to be fair, I feel like Wales had more players available at the start of the season when they won the Six Nations, and when they had players out, that's when the performance levels, like for the Lions, guys were away and they lost to Argentina, or towards the end of the year, like against New Zealand, they certainly had a ton of players missing. Against South Africa, they had some players missing too. So did South Africa, but yeah, I feel like if Wales can get the big guns fit and still manage to give the young guys some time, things are looking promising. So yes, mixed year, certainly better than 2020 for Wales, but we'll have to see how they go in 2022. Can't think of any guys off the top of my head who have kind of been dropped and won't get their way back into the squad. I question whether guys like Cuthbert or Priestland will kind of get continued game time. I wouldn't have thought so, but you guys do let us know what you reckon, if the guys, kind of senior guys who earned those call-ups, will get back in, or do you think it'll be more like Anscombe and you know, some of the younger guys on the wings? But anyway, I've gone on too long. Take care of yourselves. Thank you for liking the videos, subscribing to the channel, supporting on Patreon and whatnot, because these videos do take a wee while to prepare, but I think they're a bit of fun. So take care of yourselves, guys, and I'll talk to you again soon. See you later.